Hello and welcome everybody, I'm Papavan and this is Dev Diary number 25 for Victoria 3, The Cost of War. This one is a very exciting one. I'm coming from the angle that, the naval Dev Diary, I think I was basically content, but I wasn't incredibly happy. There were some things that I wasn't happy with. The warfare systems in general, of course, is very much exciting to me, but this Dev Diary is, to me, where basically the core of all of this is at. Yes, warfare, you have to make strategic decisions. All of that stuff flows into it, but where warfare always ends up is the population and your economy. And that is something that war needs to impact heavily to an insane degree. And quite frankly, this Dev Diary does exactly that. It explains so many systems that I was hoping for, so many concepts that, they sort of teased every now and again, but that really work incredibly well, that are now confirmed, that are interwoven, and basically every paragraph is a banger. It's quite frankly a bit insane to me just how good this Dev Diary is. It's also a long one, so forgive me for surely what will be a longer video. Just so you know, we are going to go through all of this, of course. If you disagree with my excitement, for example, then let me know in the comments. But in general, I have to tell you, this is an incredible Dev Diary and system. That war costs substantial money and resources is hardly a novel concept. Most strategy games impose a cost for creating military units, some have upkeep costs, and even in Poplar's Paradox GSGs, a metric such as a manpower pool often has to be regenerated in order to replenish damaged units. A few games even encourage you to peace out of wars that are so costly your treasury can't bear the expense for as long as it takes to win, even if you still have armies left standing. So this is of course accurate. Every grand strategy game, even if you play StarCraft, has a cost to war. If you lose units, you lose units. And I do think that this plays a big role. In EU4, for example, yeah, you lose your manpower pool, but it doesn't devastate your country to a degree that, it probably should. If you go down to 0 manpower, you are done and dusted. If you conscript, right, your entire population in Hearts of Iron 4, and I do want to say Hearts of Iron 4, I think, is a great game for warfare, especially with the No Step Back update, but I will tell you that if I conscript, basically scraping the barrel, my economy should gradually, as I start recruiting them, etc., go down, but it just goes down instantly, and it's like this limited effect. It should be disastrous. It should literally ruin me, because I am literally calling everybody now to warfare. And these concepts are explored, just as, the text says, just as I explained, but they aren't explored enough in these games. Victoria 3 does it differently. In Victoria 3, we aim to take this to the next level by modeling the truly astronomical, often lasting expenses of war in the economic system. This includes letting players and pops profit off of wars. I love that so much. Employ economic tools such as trade disruptions to gain military leverage. Encourage upgrading not only your military but also industrial output to match. Reform your laws to fit your military to your economy. Ensure your infrastructure is sufficient to maintain your country while at war. And invest in medical cores and medicine to treat your population traumatized by the front lines. This single paragraph is so bustling, it's so full of concepts that I was really hoping for. Let's just continue. I could go on and on about this paragraph for ages, but I think you will see what they mean as we walk through this. The intention here is not only to give a player a lot of economic levers to pull to prepare the country for war, although that is certainly a part of it. A big reason for making war's approach the real-life cost is to encourage the player to think hard about the opportunity cost of war. That is, what you are missing out on by spending your resources on war instead of something else like, for example, your industry, the wealth of your pops, the literacy, and so on. That is what you're... Right. And incentivize solving your diplomatic conflicts before war breaks out. If war was a cost-effective way, both of increasing your power and decreasing your enemy's power, diplomacy would be relegated to nothing but full formalities before fighting begins. But if neither party truly desires a war, no matter the power discrepancy between them, that's when the diplomatic intimidation game to see who blinks first can become real and tense. So this is where diplomatic crises, where diplomatic plays really play a huge role, okay? There may be a situation where Great Britain, for example, goes over, to you, a tiny country, and says, I want to annex you. But in reality, they want to annex you without a war. Maybe their population, they just come out of a big war. Maybe the population really isn't happy about another war, so they don't want this to escalate any further. One of the bigger pictures here, for example, that we can, of course, paint is, for example, the Little Englanders that existed in this period, I believe, in the Whig Party of Great Britain. And basically, for example, when British Columbia got a vote on whether they should join Canada, whether they should remain a colony, whether they should, join the United States of America, there was a sizable faction within Great Britain that stated, well, kind of just like, we don't want you like on our purse, we just don't want to deal with you. And this is a very similar process. We have a process here where maybe a part of the population says, you know, we've had enough of our wars, we kind of don't want any of this. And then you can push even a greater power, a much larger power, you can push them to back down. If you say this war will cost you and you will not be willing to pay the cost. I am so happy that they are taking this approach. This is really good, and frankly, although I don't think they're ever going to do it, this is also such an ingenious approach that could emulate the Cold War perfectly, right? Obviously, this idea that this is something they want to emulate was always clear with the Diplo play, but having it stated like this makes it very clear to me that not firing your nukes is actually an incredibly smart choice, because you might get away with your population not rebelling against you, not going crazy, whether you fire nukes, whether you just go into Vietnam, for example, that sort of stuff. This is really cool when it comes to, you know, giving weight to the diplomatic plays. It also means that it's a skill to know when to stop. If war was an all or nothing affair, this would not be an issue, but in Victoria 3, wars rarely result in one side getting everything they asked for, as we will learn more about next week when we cover the peace deal system. Once you have hurt your enemy enough, you might accept a consolation prize and sign a truce, knowing you will recover better over the next 5 years than they will. So I assume that means truces are 5 years, but honestly, numbers of course subject to change. More importantly, this basically states that you will not have and you will not require the wars where you siege down, you carpet siege, where you always conquer the entire country, where you go on and you fully annex them. You utilize wars truly as an extension of diplomacy when it is necessary and when you think you can come out ahead. You might not be able to come out ahead, you know, there may be reasons that doesn't happen, but I am really enjoying this, and I'm so eager to see how they are designing the peace deal system to make it so that you and the AI sometimes will be willing to sign a peace, even if you aren't achieving what you originally wanted to achieve, right? Which may be taking a certain section of territory, maybe opening a market, and so on and so forth. Really eager to see that system. There's a lot of, I think a lot of weight that this system needs to carry, because it needs to be understandable for the player and it needs to produce viable AI results. You know, the AI needs to say, you know what, I want to leave this war. You know what, my pops are unhappy, they're happy, I can continue this war. There needs to be a lot of considerations to actually make this work. I hope that, of course, that is in, but I gotta be real with you, I have extreme confidence in the team here, because what they are designing here clearly has this huge overarching vision that is so inspiring and so interesting about Victoria 3 in particular. I mean, hey, I love CK3. I really love CK3, but like war, man, I snooze. Warfare, I snooze. It's not that interesting. Wars, you know, peace, none of that is all that interesting. Like the peace deals, the actually making them, because it's either you win all, you lose all, or nobody gains anything and you get a wide peace. This is the exact opposite when it comes to the spectrum of how interesting peace and wars when we have here Victoria 3. With that being said, let's take a look at the actual screenshots. Your ability to sustain your war machine is of a crucial importance in peace as well as war. At the start of the game, many countries can get away with maintaining an army of self-supporting irregular infantry to keep the cost of arms down, but this won't be possible for long. And while wages might be affordable when your country is underdeveloped, increased productivity and labor competition will eventually raise expectations. Let's take a look at this. So, this is the Ottoman Empire. You can see, I believe these are only states. We're going to actually see a thorough look towards the actual provinces within these states in a later screenshot, so don't worry. You can also see, geographically speaking, where these expenses and the income is created. So, for example, this is right here in, I believe this is close to Izmir, right? Sorry, my geography knowledge is very bad. I think this is like close to Ankara, right? Or is this Ankara? Who cares? What I mean to say here is that basically you can spot where this cost is done, so where your arms industry is actually located, which is important. For example, if you want to determine for, okay, how are we doing in terms of arms industry, right? Like, can I recruit people from there, or do I need them to work in the factories? Now, let's take a look at this actual screenshot right here. We have the consumption tax. I think this straight up means this is a consumption tax on these two things. Chairs, so, you know, furniture, and then this I'm not sure. Is this tickets? Could this be tickets? Either way, you can see that the tax is quite high. You can add more goods to it. That's quite nice. Then you have various other things, minting, dividends, taxes, but more interestingly, down here we have national constructions. So constructions that we are paying for, I assume, be it the investment pool or be it our actual tax money, right? This looks like a saw cutting wood in half. This looks like cement, maybe? Or maybe this is a iron casting? I'm not sure. Then right here we have a crane, I believe, you know, carrying a steel bar, right? And then this, I'm not certain. If you know what this might mean, then do let me know. But I assume this basically means how fast things are created, how fast things are constructed, what resources you need to construct it, and so on. And then down here, we have the goods for government buildings, and more importantly for us now, the military wages and goods for military buildings. This is the first tooltip that pops up if you hover over this. You can see the goods for military buildings are minus 32.3k bucks, and then if we actually look at that and split that up, goods for military buildings, 28.3k go to barracks, only 4.03k, that's pretty cheap, go to the naval bases, and then 28.3k, so the entirety of the barracks are artillery, and the rest are man-o'-wars. So here you can see a pretty good split of what goods you currently need. Of course, at the start of the game, I assume it's pretty basic, right? A pretty basic approach to everything, especially in the Ottomans. Maybe I do wonder what sort of law they have in the Ottoman Empire. Maybe we are looking at just actual irregulars here, like most of them are irregulars, but yeah, there aren't even any small arms currently being consumed in the barracks. Now, here we come to a very, very interesting part, and I talked about this as well. I was really hoping for this. I hope that they kind of expand on this even further, you know, maybe be it already in or be it in the future, but this basically is where you make the actual strategic decisions for your army in the background, okay? There are two layers to this. There are the barracks production methods, and then there are the army models that we will see right here, and they are vital in determining how your army advances and how they fare on the battlefield, which is why I personally don't think that we necessarily need to, you know, micro them by saying, hey, you go and conquer this area, because at the end of the day, the way they fight is determined right here. This is the battle plan. So let's take a look at this. Your country's army model is a type of law that governs who makes up your military and how they are organized. We currently have 4 army models planned. First, it is the Peasant Levy model. So already sounds a lot like a feudal system, maybe, you know, maybe just like a pre-industrial system, basically. A permanent military force supported by barracks is non-existent or minimal in size. So that means the Ottomans actually, now that I look at this, I'm not sure. That seems quite sizable, right? Maybe they do not have the peasant levy law. Maybe it's something like national militia or even regular army. Either way, a permanent military force supported by barracks is non-existent or minimal in size. Instead, the country may raise large numbers of conscripted levies of irregulars during wartime, led by officers originating from the aristocracy. This model is cheap to maintain during peacetime, but can get very expensive, particularly in lives during war. Conscripted battalions can also take a long time to organize and provide no power projection that affects the country's prestige. Let's think about this. There's an aristocracy that is leading these. So this is, to a degree, this is officer culture, right? To a degree. We have no or a very small armed force that actually is permanently in, service. Most of the armed forces that we utilize for warfare are conscripted. This also means they're irregulars. This means that they clearly can't be specialized. You know what their production methods are in barracks. There are no barracks for them, meaning that they just are quite bad. But you can get them going. You don't really need to pay for them. This is the cheap version of this, and I assume that this law would give a lot of money to the land. Sorry, a lot of a lot of power to the landowner faction, right? The landed gentry. And in that case, it might also make it so, and this is not confirmed, but I'm thinking about this. If you have this law and you want to recruit a general, the general may to, 90% be from the landed gentry, because this is where they come from, maybe even 100%, and then you can democratize it and open it up to different factions by changing your law. So let's move on. You don't even get, just to point that out, any power projection from this, but you don't really need to spend money. However, if you ever raise these irregulars, then your working population all of a sudden isn't working anymore and, might die. So yeah, your working population is directly sacrificed here in great numbers. Now, then we have the national militia model that limits your standing army and power projection in much the same way as peasant levies, so nothing basically, but permits you to conscript a large part of your population into a well-rounded national defense force if needed. This, to me, initially at least, sounds pretty similar to the US, maybe? They're curious. These conscripted troops cannot be mobilized and are therefore automatically assigned to their local garrisons, unavailable to generals to use to advance fronts. So basically, you can have a tiny army, like a tiny standing army, but primarily, this law says we don't really go to war outside of our own country. If somebody attacks us, the people will be ready. The national militia will get together and they will defend, for example, Michigan, or they will defend against the Canadians, much like they, attempted to in 1812. That is basically what this is. Sounds a lot like the US to me. Sounds a lot like many other countries to me, maybe even, in particular, many countries that are moving on from, basically being in a feudal or roughly post-feudal society and wanting to industrialize, wanting to democratize. That is basically where we are coming from. It is also stated here, of course, a bit later on. It's the model of choice for countries who want to focus on homeland defense or countries desiring to democratize the military and limit the power of the armed forces. I have to assume that this peasant levy model might give you a higher chance to recruit landed gentry and armed forces generals, and then this one lets you recruit many other people, or maybe, since you never actually recruit your standing armies, it just doesn't really require you to have generals, right? Meaning that there just isn't that big a power source in the military in the first place, meaning the armed forces are quite limited. I love this so far. This is a sizable difference. In both of these, you are basically leveraging your society to directly, the civil society to fight off an enemy. This one is very defensive. This one is quite democratized. No longer is, the language here that the aristocracy is leading them. And here it is very aristocratic minded, right? It is very minded towards, hey, we have this subsistence farming population, for example, and we are taking these people and we're giving them rifles, and then a general says, keep marching. This one is, just basically self-defense. Mass conscription becomes available once you have unlocked the society tech nationalism. Now, I'm not sure what the tech tree looks like. Super eager to find out about that as well. Trade, tech trees, different economic systems, that's the sort of stuff that I'm really looking forward to here. The peace deal system as well, of course. But if we can trust Victoria 2, where nationalism and imperialism also was a technology, then this might be a tech for around 1850. Again, no idea how the actual tech system works, whether it is even remotely similar to Victoria 2, right? But when you get nationalism, let's say 1850, you could do mass conscription. And I think this is important. We envision mass conscription, like as a collective history, basically to be a topic of, for example, World War I, to be a topic of, for example, the Cold War, where, everybody had a conscription service going on. Some countries, of course, still have it, but this is something that existed long before this, when you had a situation where you really were fighting for your existence, and these fights exist, I mean, that is, for example, the CSA, where conscription was basically mandated. They were scraping the barrel, if you will, but that is also every other war that genuinely occurs for your existence, where you can't just say, peace out, I lose this strip of land, but I keep existing. No, this is for all of the wars where you say, I need to win this. It lets you enlist the same large number of conscripts as national militia, but does not limit the size of your standing army. So this is the best of both worlds to a degree. If you need to survive, you have your standing, your regular, your really well-equipped army, but then you also have all of the people that now can be commanded. All the conscripts are assigned to generals, so they can be used for offensive wars as well, which is different, or for offensive operations, which is different from the national militia law, where it is purely defensive. Where were we? National militia, but does not limit the size of your standing army. And all these conscripts are assigned under generals as needed. In addition, conscripts are trained faster, but are limited to infantry troops only. This makes a lot of sense, because, if we look up, for example, to the peasant levy, I mean, these are all irregulars, but like, for example, the national militia, maybe there are some, aristocrats that can pay for horses, for example. It's sort of the Roman model, I guess, but more importantly, this makes sense, because if you have mass conscription, conscripts would be trained faster because you have the infrastructure. Your law, your institutions are sort of designed to say, we can get these conscripts to the front line if needed. So yeah, they are recruited faster, but they are purely infantry troops. This is the correct choice for countries fighting no-holds-barred existential conflicts, where sending regular waves of fresh meat to the front lines is imperative. So yeah, basically, World War I, then other wars that are existentially threatening. And yeah, I mean, this law is a very interesting one. It's a very disastrous one if things go wrong, Just think about the lost generation after World War I in European countries such as France and, for example, Germany. A regular army model lets a country maintain an army of any size, even in peacetime. So basically, this is a bit like mass conscription, except not with the mass conscription part. You don't really have any, limit to it. While it also permits for conscription of a smaller number of civilians as needed, its standing army is the pride of the nation and confers considerable prestige onto it. Of course, I would say this is the standard for, the leading countries like, for example, Great Britain, Prussia, and so on. This is the big thing before you had the true mass warfare, or if you don't have an actual existential crisis, then you go on and say, you know what, we have the standing army and it will win for us. This model has the greatest flexibility in terms of military production methods. I like this. Basically, this model makes it similar to how laws give you production methods that you can then have in buildings. This gives you production methods for your barracks and makes it so that you just can be more advanced, because you can organize your army in a much greater fashion. Letting countries configure their armies without restrictions. Technologically advanced countries relying on more expensive crack troops rather than sheer numbers favor this law. That makes sense. Now, this is an interesting screen that is coming up here. Let's just check it out. Like all laws, changing your army model will be popular with some interest groups and not with others. Then in most cases, you need to have at least a semi-legitimate government that favors the law in order to have a chance to pass it without major complications. The icons you see in these laws are not yet finalized. So, we have the peasant levies. Nobody likes this. I thought about this a bit, and obviously I don't know this. Obviously nobody likes it, so you can't even initiate it, but I am also wondering, because you can't even push for this one either, right? Like, you can't do this one, mass conscription. That could be technology. Maybe we don't have the level yet, but I was also thinking, would you need at least one government member to support a law to, like, be able to push it anyway, like, to try to push it, right? What we have right here, and I think this means they are in government. These are the landed gentry. I believe this is petite bourgeoisie, and these are the labor unions. They like the national militia law. That is our current law, and we're going out of this because we're currently passing the regular army law. You can see there's a lot of undecided people. I wonder what that really means, undecided people. Could I, for example, sway some of them? Could I, for example, go, hey, you know what, I don't know, intelligentsia. Currently, you are undecided. If you do not go against me, or if you even support me, I promise to pass a different law, or I promise to recruit a general of yours. Maybe that is something that you can do, but honestly, it doesn't even need to be, because you could even sway, thinking about it, you could sway these parties simply by doing things that they actually like. You know, let's, for example, say, hey, you know, I go ahead and I do laws that you generally like, and that means you support me as a government. If they just generally support us, even if they're not in government, this may be able to sway them already. But yeah, I would like it if we could have something like giving promises to certain interest groups right here. Now, what actually is the effect of this law? Minus 10% armed forces political strength. It's a flat, or well, it's a percentage negative modifier that you guaranteed have if this is your national law, because of course national militia means the armed forces can't really plan, they can't scheme, there are no powers, because the militia that exists is decentralized and they are purely defensive. Plus 20% conscription rate, that is quite significant, can mobilize 745 battalions. That is a crazy, crazy number. 745 battalions. This law is supported by one interest group. Is it? Maybe one interest group in our government? I'm not sure. Anyway, the standing army is small, but local militias can be activated to defend their homes. And then right here, we are currently enacting the law regular army. I wonder what this means. I feel this might mean the progress that you have made in passing it. I think this basically says when it should be finished passing, right? And then this is, you know, what the next phase will have, I have to assume. There's a chance for success, 19.8%, debate, 40.4%, advance, 26.5%, and stall, 13.1%. Maybe the more you advance, for example, the higher the success chance gets, and the worse the debates go, the more the stalling stalling chance increases as well. Currently being enacted, next checkpoint. Right, so the next checkpoint to see how much this will progress is on the 22nd February 1839, right? So basically, yeah, you can envision this, and this may sound a bit stupid, but you can envision this, I think, to a degree, like sieges in all other Paradox games, where basically there's a bit of a die, and the die says, hey, you know, how we doing? Are we proceeding? Do they have a negative modifier? Do we have a negative modifier? Do we have a positive modifier? Are the walls breaking? I think that is basically what we have right here, and then you have the process right there, except, of course, different from sieges, which is like a super isolated system. In this system, a long debate, laws not passing quickly will upset your population. There's a huge impact here. So yeah, what is the effect of this? Plus 5% armed forces political strength. So they go from minus 10% to plus 5%. The regular army does increase their strength. Plus 10% conscription rate, and can mobilize merely, well, 340 battalions, because we now are half basically, right? That is the idea here. This law is supported by two interest groups. Yeah, I'm so confused. You know, 1, 3, who cares? It doesn't really matter. Listen, all of this stuff is work in progress, and I just can't really read it because this is just a screenshot. Military is supporting it, of course. They like this. The petite bourgeoisie is supporting this. I wonder why. I wonder why they enjoy the regular army so much. Does it mean that, do they enjoy it maybe because they don't want to be conscripted? That could be it. And then right here we have, of course, the landed gentry that do not like it, because I assume that, you know, hey, if they can't have full control like they would have in the peasant levies, they don't want the armed forces to have full control. Either way, I really, really like this. Of course, they all have positions to laws. I just wonder, like, what makes them to feel this way, right? I also wondered about this, and I don't think that this is going to be in the game in this fashion, but I would really like it long term to see a thing where basically an arms a group that supports or is ambivalent to a topic, right, to a law, might go against it if a group that they dislike supports it. Let's think, for example, petite bourgeoisie and the labor unions, right? That could be interesting. A sort of internal fighting in your society via the interest groups. But hey, honestly, that is something that I don't think we should expect. It's I would just really love that sort of stuff. Conscripting the civilian population into military service is an option available to all countries, but only during wartime or when the country is at threat of war, so when a diplomatic play is going on. Conscripted battalions do not project power and therefore do not impart prestige, and under some army models they do not have access to certain advanced production methods that require specialized training. Yeah, basically mass conscription, you know, says no, you don't have that. They're all infantry troops, they are what they are, and they will be utilized in this way. If you want to have specialized stuff, then have it in the regular army. Of course, peasant levies also, I would assume, are always irregulars, because that's basically the way they work, right? Conscripts can be activated state by state or all across your country at once. Activating conscripts creates a conscription center in the state where civilians are recruited into temporary military service, and the cost of these conscripts are only incurred as they become active. You press the button, a conscription center is built, and basically people go to work there. I wonder what the calculation is, like to what degree they calculate who goes there. Is it payment? Is it, you know, actual conscription? So like we are forcing you into the service to a certain degree. I really wonder about that, but either way, this is a good system, because you're going to see what that means when they leave their old jobs and go to their new job, which is the conscription center and being at war. It's amazing what that means. Let's check that out. When the conscription center appears, recruited pops will leave their regular places of work en masse, which could cause major temporary disruptions to your nation's economy. If the conscripts in a certain state happen to primarily originate from the lower strata of its underpaying lead mines, this will reduce output and thereby affect the glasswork and munition plants that consume the lead produced in your market, which in turn will impact all its urban centers as well as your very military machinery. This is amazing. They could have just lowered output, okay? They could have just been like, you recruit your conscripts, and that has a negative impact, because let's say 25%, 30% of the people that work on these farms are now gone, right? But they didn't do that. They actually are physically moving the jobs of these pops into this new location, meaning other jobs are now free and can be filled if people can migrate into it. But that also means that if the other pops that had those jobs come back, they can't get those jobs anymore. I seriously love this. If you have enough pops in search of labor, this situation will correct itself over time as the lead mines rehire their lost workers, but in the long run, this simple action of initiating conscription in a single state will still mean a shift in wealth distribution, political allegiances, population distribution, industrial profitability, and so on. This is really good. If I conscript people in, let's say for example, Franconia, I conscript them there. There are all of a sudden a lot of free jobs. If these are high-paying jobs, people from Bavaria, Saxony, Thuringia, Baden-Württemberg will migrate to Franconia, take these jobs, and now live there. Then the conscripts come back and say, God damn, we are actually unemployed. What do we do now? First of all, unrest. We will be unhappy. There may be turmoil here. I want my job back. I want my life back, right? This is an amazing thing. This is also similar, of course, to the question, and this isn't even explained here, but man, this just came to me. What this system can really well model is the fact that women would start working, for example, during World War I. Because you need people working. And then the men come back and are like, wait a minute. That is not the same labor market that I knew when I was gone. This is such good stuff. I am actually so ecstatic about this. Where were we? Those men returning home alive may need to look for new opportunities to regain their old standard of living. Everything has consequences. Amazing stuff. Like Victoria 2, they could have just set the efficiency of a building, of a pop that, rather of a building that a pop that is actually conscripted is in, goes down. They could have done that, but they didn't. They said, let's have a whole system about the economic and societal changes when people are conscripted. I love it. Second, conscripted battalions are always created from scratch, which can take a lot of time. This means they lose any experience gained in the last armed conflict as they stand down. Perfectly reasonable in my opinion. While your standing army units will get more and more impressive over time. Soldier for soldier, conscripts give you less bang for your buck. It is basically tradition, right? It is regiment tradition right there. Third, conscripted battalions are distributed among your generals by their normal rank-based proportions and aren't automatically mobilized as soon as they emerge. So first, the conscripted battalions need to be recruited and created from scratch. And then any conscript battalions assigned to mobilized generals must also mobilize in order to be able to leave for the front. As we explored in the Front and General's Dev Diary, when such a large number of battalions are raised all at once, it is infrastructure that governs how quickly they will be able to get ready. So this needs to be taken into account when choosing where to recruit your concept. So, first of all, much of this paragraph sounds great. I like the infrastructure, of course. You know, you need to consider where you mobilize the troops, or where you get the mobilization troops from, so that you can then get them to the front as you need them, and, you know, as it is, of course, timely. But there was also a thing that sort of like had me think about it a bit, which is the topic of the conscripts being handed out to generals by the normal rank-based proportions, much like it is done with barracks. I thought about this, basically, and there's this one scenario where I'm like, it kind of doesn't fit, but like, it really fits. So let's, for example, let's say we're England and we have a war in India, and I say, hey, I have a law, I get some conscripts, but I have 4 generals in India and I only want to send 2. That means that 2 of these get conscripts that never see action, and that's not really unrealistic, it just doesn't sound intuitive. But the reality here is, of course, you know, that is done in a way where, if it wasn't this way, if you could assign, hey, only to mobilize generals, for example, you could cheese civil wars. If you say, you know, hey, I have a general that is very unhappy, I'm not going to mobilize this general's troops, what I will do is, I will just mobilize a troop, you know, or I will just mobilize a general that I like, he gets all the troops, and then I can smother the rebellion before it even starts. That, of course, would be bad. I prefer this for game mechanics purposes, but also, and let's be real, if you do recruit a lot of people, right, and you have generals it's just idling, I think you might not have to, like, conscript that many people to begin with. If you start conscripting en masse, then you're probably in a war where all of your generals are mobilized, right? So I think this basically, like, balances itself out. I think this is like it's a fine approximation of reality. I'm quite confident that this will work, not just as a mechanic, but also as the actual historical circumstance. While all of the above happens automatically with the press of a button, the impact can be complex and will be experienced over time. Choosing to activate conscripts in the populous but rural vineyard valleys of Rhône will have a very different effect on France than activating conscripts in industrialized, well-connected Paris. I assume industries will suffer much more, but you will get the troops faster. Rhône, you get them slower because of infrastructure concerns, but at the very least, you know, maybe it's just a vineyard. Yeah, vineyards are important, but not as important as the arms manufacturers, for example. You can see it right here as well. Mass mobilization may provide access to vast numbers of fighting men, but redirecting up to 25%, that is insane, of your capable workforce to the war effort, in this case 60 battalions, or the equivalent workforce required to staff about 12 levels of farms, mines, or manufacturing industries, could play a real number on your economy. These visuals are a work in progress, but demonstrate how the player functionally interacts with the map through the lens system, either through clicking directly on regions on the map, or by selecting options from a list. So, this is maybe the first, or maybe one of the first views that we have gotten of actual provinces. You can see it right here. So the thick lines are states. So this is the state of Bosnia-Herzegovina, I believe. And then you have the provinces in there. This would be... I'm not sure like where the borders actually begin and end there, but here, for example, you can see it in Italy, right? It goes up there. So this is one state. This is a state that is something like this. You can see also that the tiles are actually quite distributed. You can see this is clearly sustenance farms, right? Substance farm. These are an actual city with a port. This is also a city, or at least a manufacturing, or maybe like a recruiting site, something like this. And then we have fairly sparsely populated rest of the region. I also absolutely adore the little ships that we have here. This looks so good. It looks so cute. But let's get to the actual important stuff. We have all of these states. We can click on them and they will recruit the units that they have right here, and then the size. I think the size directly corresponds to how many battalions. So is this like 12 units made up of 60 battalions? I'm not actually... No, I don't actually think so. I don't know. This just, I think, is like a general size, because if you look at this, it always corresponds with it, right? 945, 1050, 1155, and 1260. Whatever that exactly means, I don't think it really matters. But you can choose. If I recruit people in Albania, what happens? I recruit them in Albania. Depending on the infrastructure that Albania has, I can then get them out towards the Balkans HQ, right? This is these people. And I assume, since they actually have hourglasses here, that they might currently be mobilizing, and they get then assigned. So that would be 30-30, for example, right? And then we have to hope that they get mobilized fairly soon, or else the war that I'm currently fighting might already be lost. I like this system. It really will change the face of Albania, and that is one of those things that, as much as other games, CK3, EU4, Stellaris, they do simulate loss and cost of war, but this... they outdid themselves here, in all seriousness. The way this is interwoven, this is where you win and where you lose wars, where you decide whether you want to continue this war or whether you just want to finish it, even if you lose something. It might be better for you than actually risking the very well-being of your society for the rest of your existence. Huge fan. Seriously, this dev diary gets almost no criticism whatsoever from me. It's insane. A very tangible cost is, of course, the actual money that you're spending on military goods to mobilize troops in the field. While barracks consume military goods at all times in proportion to the number of battalions it supports, units that are mobilized consume twice the normal maintenance level of goods. Understandable, logical, that's the cost of war. I support it. Not only does this double the quantity you need to buy, it also puts a lot of additional demand on the goods, raising the prices per unit as well. It also would mean actually that the infrastructure would be used even more, because now double the goods need to go into the state. Right. As long as they can keep their production levels steady, your domestic arms industries, munition plants and war machine industries will see profits skyrocket off of this increased consumption of your mobilized troops. Yeah, definitely. This is a huge shift. You can literally have a country that needs war to have a good economy. Because if you have an economy, right? If you have an arms industry that is the backbone of a huge chunk of the regions of your country, the regions that support you, let's for example say the Ruhr-Rhine area, right? So basically Nordrhein-Westfalen, we have a situation where ThyssenKrupp and so on, and let's say you're not at war and they can't maintain, the production level, or rather they won't maintain it anymore because it's not worth it. They are underproducing, they can't pay the wages anymore. The entire thing goes bust. The ripple sent through your society would be enormous, meaning you may have to go to war just to suffice that industry. This is actually, this is just amazing. I love this. This also means other nations, allies or neutral parties will see the sudden benefit of exporting arms to you once you mobilize. If you normally export military goods to others, you may wish to cancel these routes to keep prices down because you want to have them for local consumption, while if neutral parties import arms from you, this may be a good time to embargo or at least tariff these goods. Every little bit helps your treasury and ultimately your frontline troops. So, embargo and tariffs, they didn't really go into the details there, but there's a screen underneath that is really, really interesting for trade, where we, I think, can glean some details, right? That sort of stuff. Trade routes crisscrossing the ocean are susceptible to your enemy's convoy raiding fleets. Until a patrol discovers them and sends them to a home base for repairs, such a fleet can do considerable damage both to your supply network as a whole, affecting all trade routes as well as the supply of overseas generals, and to some shipping lanes in particular, possibly crippling your country's access to strategic goods like small arms or hard-to-find imports such as radios. Compromising a country's access to industrial, luxury, or even staple goods can also be devastating to their ability to stay in the war, as we will learn more about next week. So this is, first of all, this is very, very logical. Your shipping lanes are important. The Navy matters. That is both on a societal level, but also on a military level. This one is interesting because you could emulate this on like multiple levels. You could emulate this with an actual, similar to Stellaris, for example, war exhaustion score, or you could emulate it simply by your pops becoming unhappy, right? That already should have this impact. Maybe it's just a combined system, basically, where war exhaustion is derived directly from how your pops are doing, right? Like how they are performing, maybe also how the war is progressing. I'm really, really eager to see the calculation of whatever they're doing there, because, again, this is a big deal for the AI. The AI needs to understand when it doesn't want to fight a war anymore, or when it does want to fight a war. I think that is very, very vital right there. If the AI understands this correctly, then you can basically get away in diplomatic plays if you get strong allies. Because then the AI that ultimately originally threatened you will say, I did want to like take that land, but I don't want to go to war with France over it, right? I think this is such a vital point. I'm super excited for this. Convoy raiding fleets can also damage connections to overseas markets, for example by compromising the East India Company's connection to London. This would then result, of course, in all of the people that trade with the EIC to no longer get their goods or sell their goods, and to local, regional complete collapse. This is good stuff. This is really good stuff. The effect of warfare has never been dealt with in this way. This could potentially devastate the economies of clusters of dozens of states who may have come to rely on such a connection to survive, particularly if their economies aren't locally well balanced, but relying on cash crops or specialized manufacturing. This is, in my opinion, usually when you play grand strategy games, where the playthroughs that you do differ, most of the time is where you conquer and what your self-understanding is. That is true, I think, for most grand strategy games. In this one, I can have the same understanding. I want to conquer all of Germany, for example. But depending on how I build my economy, I would have a completely different playthrough. I have prayed for this, and they are doing it. This is a beautiful thought that they had. I can only say, seriously, they're like no matter how you feel about warfare, I think we can all agree everything comes together here, as it should, and in the best way it could. Ending up on the opposite side of your trading partners during diplomatic plays can be catastrophic for the war effort. On this screenshot, we can see the British used to supply the Ottomans with 100 units of artillery each week, but with Great Britain now siding with Russia, they will have to try to find a new trading partner as soon as possible, or try to hold the Russians off despite an artillery shortage. Another potential crisis the Ottomans have to deal with is the imminent stoppage of a small amount of liquor and enormous quantities of luxury clothes, at least a latter of which is prone to make many wealthy pops feel this war might carry to a higher price, war exhaustion, something like this, right? This is a really interesting screenshot. Let's really dissect this one, okay? We have the internal supply network of the British market. You can see right here, there are trade routes, British market to Sicilian market, to Swedish market, to Hawaiian market. Then we have supply lines for what I can only assume are generals: Matthew Whitworth Aylmer, Henry Hardinge, Henry Smith, Charles Carnegie, and Wyndham Wentworth Fitzwilliam. That's a proud number of generals, quite frankly. You can see C notes, then the convoys and cost, of course, numbers not finished. Then over here, we can see that war with Russia has broken out. So this is, we're the Ottomans and we're looking at this. Russia wants to conquer Dobruja and Kars. I have to assume that Russia basically started a diplomatic play. They are the attackers after all. They want to liberate Moldavia. They want to ban slavery. I assume that banning slavery is something the British approved of. They want to humiliate the Ottomans, and then, wow, who knows what comes after that. On the other side, we have the Ottomans. We have Libya, Moldavia. Not sure who this is. I'm very interested in the fact that this appears to be like a modern-day Russian flag. Who are they? And then right here we have, I think, Wallachia, right? That must be Wallachia. You can see the strengths, of course. They only want Russian war reparations. The Ottomans really tried to simply say, I do not want this to escalate, so I don't want to get any of the other factions, like the British, for example, hostile towards me, which is why I will only demand war reparations, right? It didn't work. They're still in a pretty tough position, I would say. Now, the interesting thing here is, and this was sort of, we already knew this, but this is nice to see it confirmed, that when you trade with a country, when you have a trade agreement, you can start running trade routes inbound and outbound, meaning you can, on your end, import something or export something. They also can import or export. If I willingly export something to you, you can stop this by either no longer having a trade agreement with me, that is at least what I think this means, or by having an embargo on a certain good, or an embargo, you know, or a tariff, for example, that sort of stuff, making it less attractive for me to actually export this stuff. This is interesting to me because there's this really like this dual and triple relationship. If I am at war with somebody that relies on imports from overseas, so for example, let's say the East Indian Company relies on imports of artillery from London. If I'm at war with the company, but the Great British Empire is neutral in this war, and the company itself is importing artillery, I can block this, right? I can sink their ships by convoy raiding. What happens if it is the British manually having an outbound trade route towards the EIC? How would that work? Actually, in this case, this wouldn't even work. It would be an internal supply network, right? Because they are in the British market. But I hope you know where I'm coming from. If they weren't in the same market, how would it be handled? Would this be something where I can intervene against the neutral state that is manually exporting something to my enemy that they need? Could I go against that? How would that impact it? I would be super eager to find out about that. What else can we see here? We can see, this is the Balkans quite clearly. This is Serbia. We can see troops. And then we can see some sort of navy. Oh boy, there's a lot going on here, I feel. And this seems to be, by the way, a bit of a reverse Crimean War. At least to a degree. Of course, there are some participants missing, the French and so on. But like, yeah, in this case, the British sided with the Russians rather than with the Ottomans. The goods, the technologies, and in some case laws you have access to practically limit which military production methods you have available to. So yeah, this is in your barracks. These determine the composition of your army and navy and include both upgrades and options. I assume actually in the barracks and in conscription centers if you have the right law. As always, this list is not finalized but represents what is in the current build of the game only. Let's take a look. Alright, so what I did here, I marked basically what corresponds to a button, what it consumes, and what sort of steps there are. Let's take a look at this. Infantry Organization. They govern the doctrines, you know, of how people fight. They mostly eat small arms and ammunition, and this is then a type that includes irregular line, skirmish, trench, and squad infantry, and this impact, so this impact of the production method is mostly offense, defense, and training rate. Then we have artillery support. Of course, consumes mostly artillery and ammunition. It boosts offense, morale, damage, kill rate, and devastation. Devastation we're going to see in a bit. And you mostly consume cannons. No, sorry, these are the production types. Cannons, mobile, I don't know, shrapnel, and siege artillery are represented. Then we have battalions' mobility options. These, of course, you know, are mobility options. They impact their ability to damage during an offense and capture larger amounts of territory at the conclusion of a one battle. Horses can do that much faster than me just walking. Cavalry forces are the default, which can eventually be supplemented with bicycle messengers, and after the turn of the century, aerial reconnaissance or even an armored division supplied by late game. Big point here for late game war machines, because the early tanks of course didn't do that, but they account for it, for this. Machines in the industries producing aeroplanes and tanks. Your standing army can unlock various specialist companies for barracks to focus on. These include machine gunners, infiltrators, flamethrower companies, and chemical weapon specialists. These specialists consume various goods to inflict quite specific effects. And then, last but not least, we have medical aid. Determines what sort of battlefield medicine your troops have access to, from the default of wound dressing through first aid to fully fledged field hospitals. These consume fabric and opium to treat the sick and wounded, to minimize the casualties inflicted by attrition and combat alike. This is effectively a unit builder. I speculated that it would actually be 3D, like that you would see like a little guy standing there getting different stuff as you equip it, much like the Stellaris builder, right? But this is effectively a unit builder. Infantry Organization, artillery support, mobility, specialist companies, and medical aid. We have them right here, right? Infantry, artillery, mobility, specialist, and then medical aid. I believe this is just like normal line infantry. This is artillery, so cannons. These are horses, of course. This looks... Is this a machine gun? Do they actually have a machine gun here? And then you can see what they consume, you know, what sort of arms they consume, and so on and so forth. I believe this may mean that they don't have enough of the shells. Then you can see the effects of this. So they provide, you know, the battalions, 20% army offense, army defense, army morale damage, minus 25% battle provinces lost, 30% army kill rate, and 250 training rate. So they train quite fast, I would say. They probably are pretty good at hindering you at advancing very effectively, although I don't know what, of course, future benefits are. And then right here we have different production sub-methods of the medical aid. Wound dressing doesn't appear to consume anything. I mean, yeah, you're not really doing much with it. And then first aid actually, you know, does something. You need opium and fabric. Change medical aid production method to first aid. Input goods shortage of opium will result in a penalty in all buildings' outputs. Predicted impact on weekly balance, right, goes down. And unscaled modifiers plus 20% army survival rate. That is pretty big. That is pretty big. You save the lives of your pops and can fight another day. Now, there seems to be a front here. I am so curious. Is this a naval invasion? Or is this just like a naval battle? Like a naval mission, you know, a combination? They're basically like engaged in that. Either way, we are getting our behind handed to us. The Russians are defeating us easily. Very, very easily. Now, the interesting thing here is as well, if you go for first aid and you need opium, and you import the opium, it will still be used even if you aren't mobilized, right? Once you mobilize, you double your consumption, meaning it actually goes in there. But until then, not really. And your pops might consume it. I like that. I hope that this exists for various aspects of this, right? Similarly, naval bases also consume goods to produce flotillas with different attributes. These are due for a design pass, so I won't go into details which are prone to change anyway. But in broad strokes, the fundamental production method determines the class of the central vessel that defines each flotilla. Is this a man o' war, ironclad, monitor, dreadnought, or battleship? Do you have submarines or even aeroplane carriers accompanying your fleet? All these have pros and cons for different types of missions, letting you specialize your fleet for protecting or attacking trade routes, performing naval invasions, or blockading ports. Good stuff. I think the way they are abstracting naval organization is completely fine. Again, I would love coaling stations and that sort of stuff, but the fundamental idea of I need to be able to protect my naval, you know, supply and whatnot is in here. It is emulated, and you can have a certain, you know, distinct form to this, where you, for example, have certain ships that do certain tasks better, where it is well done. Again, I am praying that we will eventually see something that goes a bit further, goes towards coaling stations, towards actual regional stations and whatnot, but this is also sort of already in, so yeah, I hope for more in the future, but I think this does it well enough. You're going to see this in this paragraph right here. If you have paid especially close attention, you might now ask, we know you must mobilize your army and generals to see effective use of them in wartime, but what about mobilizing your navy and admirals? In fact, navies are considered to always be ready and in active service, realistic very much, and do not need mobilization. You also cannot recruit conscripts to start manning your warships just as war breaks out for obvious reasons. Yeah, completely reasonable. This means expanding and upgrading your navy is both a long-term process and a long-term investment. Navies are excellent at projecting power, however, so while an impressive navy might not be particularly useful outside of armed conflict, it will at least grant you considerable prestige even as it burns its way through your treasury. Here comes the part that sort of consoles me about the naval system. Since navies do not cost any more during war than in peace, you may as well use them. You can set up most orders for your admirals anytime, even while at peace. Once they spot ships flying hostile flags, they will take action automatically. I speculated this already, that they sort of say the stations that we have, whether they can be repaired there or not, let's put that aside, but the stations that we have, where the ships are always active, that is sort of emulated by incentivizing you already placing your navy. I really hope that if I do not have a navy next to Japan, for example, right, and they start raiding my convoys next to Japan, I don't know, I am Japan, I have colonies in the Philippines, for example, right, and for some reason my navy is all the way out in South America, I really hope that the effect will be very, very significant of me basically having not the core of what must be protected in my empire protected, right? Then, yeah, I'm basically like, I hope for coaling stations and such in the future, but this works more than just fine. A less direct cost of war, which nonetheless can have severe consequences, is devastation. We mentioned this earlier. This reflects direct damage to an entire state and its infrastructure caused by battles transpiring in that state. Particularly large degrees of devastation is inflicted by battles involving heavy and sustained artillery barrages. Devastation directly impacts infrastructure and thereby market access, making the state economically unsustainable. It also tends to cause migration away from the state, an increase in pop mortality, and other very detrimental effects. After the war, this damage will be gradually reversed, but this rebuilding effort can take a long time and cause a lot of economic upheaval in the process. This is a huge part of why, and I've seen this suggested by a few people, but there were people that were like, they will add micro eventually, they will do it. This is why that is something I do not believe, fundamentally. This system is the only system that actually exists that can properly and forcefully emulate the disaster that is warfare in certain regions. Even in Hoi 4. That doesn't happen necessarily. Yes, you can have certain province modifiers, you can bomb the provinces and so on, but the war and the battle itself necessitate devastation. This is a simple fact of life. Look at this. This is Wallachia, right? No, Moldavia. Yep, this is... no, actually, wait a minute. This is Bucharest, so this is Wallachia. Then this would be Austria, and this is basically Moldavia, I believe. Anyway, you can see right here, it gets muddy, you know, like, the more effects they add there, the happier I will be, but, like, I really, really enjoy the fact that you can see this, that you can feel the disaster that has opened up because you declared a war, because you accepted a war for your people. The effects are also significant, and you can see it spreads towards these states as well. Current devastation, 74.8%. Daily change, minus 0.1. That's not that much. It will take a long time to recover from this. And now imagine having World War I and everything goes to hell. Real no man's land for years, right? Minus 74% migration attraction. 37.4% negative throughput, so like minus 37.4. Minus 74.8% state region infrastructure and plus 37% mortality. If you had individual battles, you could pick where exactly you fight and the fight is limited to this location. Yeah, you could give general modifiers, but it wouldn't be the same. This is the best way of modeling the impact war has on the population that isn't fighting wars. War early on, where you have artillery, but the artillery is really used in line battles, you know. War early on like that will be much less disastrous than war like World War I, where the artillery never stops. It keeps hammering, and it keeps hammering. I love this. Seriously, this dev diary is something else. Finally, of course, there is the human cost of war. In Victoria 3, it is your actual population who fight and die for your causes. The same population that harvest your fields and work at your assembly lines, who vote for their preferred party or rebel against your enlightened rule, who learn to read and write or pack up and move in search of greener pastures. Many men fall in battle, of course, but more commonly they perish on the way to the battle or after the battle, whether from disease, starvation, infections, or exposure. Simply mobilizing your forces to the front will increase the risk of dying or suffering lifelong disability. To counteract this, you can research and invest in good frontline medical care or favor generals with proven ability to reduce such needless casualties. Those casualties who do not recover from their injuries and return to the frontline will either return home as dependents or die outright. As a result of both of these effects, after a major war, your pops are likely to consist of an outsized proportion of dependents to workforce, but this will self-adjust over time, especially if birth rate is high, because they will of course ultimately fade out, new people will be born, and that is when the pop, loses their dependents being very high, as a high percentage. There may well be a post-war period where you are forced to deal with a large portion of your population not being economically productive. It's in cases like these you'll be glad you've enacted a good pension system to ease this impact during the recovery period. Victoria 3 is an economy and society game, and war is embedded in this very idea like in no other game. There is not a single game on the market that can compete with the ambition of this. There will be bugs, there will all be that stuff. Listen, I'm not saying the game will be amazing, and because I don't know that. What I am saying is, what they are emulating here is the most ambitious thing that I have ever seen done in this field. It's not even close. Victoria 2 is not even close itself. Not even close. It starts with the conscription centers, it goes on with the dependence topics. This is insanity, and I am here for it. War raises the stakes, or rather, why is the cost of war so important? It raises the stakes and thus increases the payoff. It creates meaningful economic interplays between the economy and military, increasing the need to prepare and build a reliable engine. It enables cost-benefit analysis as a strategic tool, making the best strategist not necessarily one that uses overwhelming force, but the one that uses just enough force to get what they want. Next week, we will learn more about how you can leverage the effects of this exorbitant costs by making peace deals favoring you that look relatively attractive to your opponent. Until then. This is amazing. That's all I have to say. Let me know what you think in the comments. Cost of war is why the warfare system is the way it is. It comes both with this statewide effect, it comes with the conscription effect. This is a system designed to be embedded within the very core of Victoria 3. CK3 isn't embedded in the very core. Characters take, they participate in wars, but the actual effects of the wars, the actual effects on the characters, they play no role. Same for Victoria 2 and so on and so forth. This is completely different. Much more graduated. Excellent than what we've had before. Let me know what you think. I love it. I'll see you later. Alligator.